Uh, Now the recording has started. Perfect. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And our last arrival. Hey, Bradley. Thanks for popping in right as I started the recording. Yeah, thanks for joining us at this meeting of the Western Canada HubSpot user group. Now, again, you don't have to be in Western Canada to be welcome here. So we're just happy to share some knowledge. And to all of the folks who are probably going to be watching this as a recording because we scheduled it for American Thanksgiving, so nobody showed up. We appreciate your attention after the fact. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about lead scoring, kind of how to get started with it, the places it can play in, a modern marketing machine, how to actually do it in HubSpot, and how some of the common pitfalls that we've seen people run into when tackling lead scoring. But first, going to give ourselves a quick introduction. Basically, I am Cody Pearson and Lisa Latour, and we together are Hubcap Solutions. We are a two-person HubSpot, consulting firm based up here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I've been doing HubSpot in one form or another, either with ad agencies or as a freelancer for about 5 years now. Lisa's been working with me for the past 2. And we're just really excited to meet new folks that are using HubSpot, help people on their HubSpot journeys, and help people see the maximum value that they can get out of the platform, which led us to offering to host, or volunteering to host the Western Canada HubSpot user group. So let me kick over my presentation and actually start sliding through. So here's exactly what we're going to cover, kind of in order. So like I said, we're going to start off with a little bit of a conversation about what is lead scoring and really more where lead scoring fits, kind of as part of your marketing engine. Then we're going to be getting started. How do you actually consider what are the steps that go into building a lead score and planning out your lead scoring model? We are going to look at lead scoring actually in a HubSpot account, and that is going to be both the normal HubSpot lead scoring property that's been around for years. And since they did launch a new lead scoring beta that has been starting to kind of filter out into the world since we originally scheduled this hug back in August, we're also going to look at kind of how the new lead scoring model or tool compares to the old one. We're going to talk a little bit about how to actually use and manage your lead score. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into at least how Lisa and I typically structure lead scoring projects, mostly so that you guys know what to expect if you guys do decide to get started on a lead scoring project of your own with us, on your own, or with another partner. So with that, what is lead scoring? So just a standard definition. Lead scoring is the process of using demographic data, job titles, geographies, company sizes, and engagement data to assign a score or ranking to your contacts in HubSpot. That is lead scoring. Now, a lot of other stuff goes with lead scoring, assigning ranks and grades and the actual constructing the follow-up that you do and the nurture programs and the X and the Y and the Z that comes after lead scoring. But lead scoring itself really is just a calculation of how well does somebody meet a certain set of criteria based on their demographic data or what they've done on your website, in your emails, and et cetera, et cetera. So lead scoring is a foundation, not an end in and of itself. Knowing that somebody has 38 points doesn't inherently matter unless you know what 38 points means. Is it 38 out of 40, 38 out of 100, 38 out of 1,000? And what did they do to get those points? And I say this only because one of the biggest things about lead scoring is making sure that people other than yourself understand what a lead score means. Often the goal is to show a sales team or something similar that, hey, here's people with a high lead score. But if that team doesn't understand what somebody did or what criteria they might have met to achieve that lead score, they have trouble trusting it or investing in it. So when I say that the lead score is just a combination of all those assets. It's important that you understand what all those assets are, and important what people downstream benefiting from the score understand what goes into that score so that they can invest in it as much as you can. Otherwise, it really is just a number. So, why actually do lead scoring? This is another common initial starting point that we challenge people with. So again, strict definition, lead scoring is used to prioritize which leads to engage with and how to engage with them, which is typically either by automation or manual intervention. So the first thing I like to tell people, and that's why it's in bold at the bottom of the page, is if you engage with every lead exactly the same, you don't need lead scoring. Because what lead scoring is supposed to do is help you sort through, of all the leads that we've had coming in, which ones can we ignore? Which ones do we need to nurture via marketing? And which ones does the sales team need to follow up with? Now, if you either have a really big sales team, so they have the capacity to follow up on every single lead, or you have a low enough lead volume that you have the time to follow up on every single lead, then it really doesn't matter whether a lead has a score of 10 or a score of 100 if you're just going to pick up the phone and call that person regardless. Like for us, Lisa and I, we don't bother with a lead score. Like I get maybe kind of one organic inbound lead via the website every couple of months. Most of my stuff comes from referrals or existing clients. So for me, even if I looked at a lead and was like, they're based somewhere way out of my time zone, and I looked at the company and they're not, super in my expertise wheelhouse, I'm still probably going to return the email and just say, hey, how's it going? Would love to talk to you a little bit more. So to me, it doesn't matter whether a lead would have a high score or a low score. I'm going to treat them all the same. So if your organization falls into that same, bucket, you probably don't need to bother with a lead score because it's just going to be something you have to figure out and maintain. That's not going to add a lot of value in the long run. On the flip side, if that does sound like you, if you are like, yes, I've got a high lead volume, or I really do need help focusing my team on the inbound leads that make the most sense, that are the best quality, then that's why you would want to bother with a lead scoring system. So again, just a little graphic that I stole from another partner named Ty. So you can see the 75, that's your sent to sales. The 54, that's your nurture. The 15 are the ones that you can let safely skate by. So how do you actually get started with lead scoring? So lead scoring, and I'll say this in advance of the actual how you actually build a lead score. Lead scoring, setting up a lead score in HubSpot is not a complicated thing to do. Like it's in the, historically, it was just one property that you set up and then it would automatically calculate. There's not a whole lot to it from an implementation standpoint. What there is a lot of is figuring out what makes up a lead score. So, start one is pinpointing actions. I put actions twice. Actions, pages or pieces of information that would identify a qualified prospect. So this is, again, from a partner perspective, this is all information that you already have. Like, on your website, oh man, do I have a pricing page? Is there some really, deep cornerstone or pillar page that if people consume I know that they're really interested in it. Are there specific job titles other than, even CEO, CXO, all that stuff counts, but it's like, hey, maybe you work in education, and a dean or a headmaster or something like that is a really strong job title for you. If you work in IT, is it a manager? Is it an administrator? Is it a director? Whatever. Are there different levels of conversion on your website? So again, when talking to folks, this usually breaks down into 3 levels. One, you have like a newsletter sign up, which just requires an email. Then you have like maybe some a webinar or an ebook download, which is kind of first name, last name, email, company name. And then you've got the standard, talk to sales or request a demo form. So like in my mind, all 3 of those different types of conversions are worth different amounts. Somebody who's asking to talk to sales is not guaranteed to be a perfect fit, but probably requires instant intervention as opposed to somebody who's signing up to the newsletter. So the first step, and when I say the first step, I mean this can be the first step that you do on your own, or this is typically the first step that we would do when we start a process working with somebody, is we just sit down and we say, okay, independent of what all of these things, these potential actions and pieces of information are worth to the score, what are they? Lay them out. Tell me which industries you specialize in. Are there any geographies that you don't work in? Maybe you just don't work in China. So, China is going to be definitely not a positive score. So assembling everything that matters to you is the first step in setting up a lead score. The next step, again, even before, because the natural progression in people's minds is, okay, I'm going to figure out what those actions or data points are. Then they immediately want to start assigning scores to them, which makes perfect sense. You're going to have to do that. Spoiler alert, that's step 3. But step 2 is also really important, because one thing people often forget is that in order to score that information consistently, that information has to be in HubSpot. So the number of times I've asked, people have been like, they made a lead score matrix and they've been like, all right, if they're in the healthcare industry, we're going to give them an extra 20 points. And then I'm like, okay, well, how do we know whether they're in healthcare? And then the client pauses and they're like, oh yeah, how do we know they're in healthcare? So is that a situation where, hey, is that on all of your forms? Are you asking for industry in a lot of your conversion points? Or, are you going to trust HubSpot's AI that based on somebody's email domain can say, oh, I recognize that company. Yeah, it's totally in healthcare. So, are you asking for it? Are you getting it? Another common headache is people want to say, hey, I want to score everybody who's seen more than 5 pages or has been on the website more than twice. But if your information is being, say, synced over from Salesforce, or you're adding it via an import, you don't have cookie data for a lot of those, for those prospects or for those contacts in your database. So until they actually make a website conversion, you're never going to know whether Cody Pearson, the guy you imported after you saw him at an event, you're never going to know how many pages Cody Pearson has seen. So a lot of times people will want to factor that stuff into a lead score, but then not realizing that they're not going to have it for as many people in the database as you think. The same also goes for data that your team might be entering. Yeah, maybe you want to add extra points for job title, but if job title isn't a required field or a prompted field when people are manually creating, or if they're creating data, we're creating their contacts mostly through the email plugin, and some of that data isn't getting filled in consistently. Again, you're going to have incomplete or wildly inconsistent scores because you might be assigning points for something that almost nobody in your database has. And that's fine if that was intentional. If you were like, yep, we're going to give director level job title plus 20 points. And we know not a lot of people are going to have it, but we want it to be that way because, we know we really want to draw attention to those folks. It's just, if you find yourself building a score based on data that you don't have, you're going to be wondering why your scores are so low. And that's probably going to be the reason why. So once you've figured out here's the stuff that matters for me, whether it's actions or whether it's data points. Next, you figured out, okay, I know how and how consistently I expect all of those data points to be populated. Then you get to the score. And so this is just a look at the rubric that Lisa and I use when planning this out with clients. I am gonna send along, with the thank you email or the follow-up email that's gonna have the recording. You're also gonna get our standard rubric of just common stuff and common scores that we assign things by. But here you go. Like, so, I've said and this is all working to a 50-point, 50-point SQL. So once somebody's accumulated 50 points, they get sent over to, whatever sales team would be involved. So, number of unique forms submitted, number of page views, number of site visits, Zoom webinars. Again, a lot of folks use Zoom webinar. And this, one thing I will say is that this matrix was built using the old HubSpot property score. So you used to have to build a HubSpot score property, and it wouldn't give you the ability to increment. You couldn't just say for every Zoom webinar registration, add 20 points. So you kind of had to multi-count and say, if it is equal to or greater than 1, get 20. If it is equal to or greater than 2, give 20 more. If it is equal or greater than 3, give 20 more. So, there's some redundant lines in here. That's just because of how HubSpot used to handle. So I do like, just in terms of fields that I reference in HubSpot frequently, I love the number of unique forms submitted field, because that counts. There's a number of forms submitted, but then if somebody submits the same form multiple times, it doesn't increment that. But number of unique forms submitted, it allows you to score without doubling up on points if people are reconverting on the same thing multiple times. That's just a property that I like to use often for stuff. Yeah, so you'll build your matrix. Again, maybe you start with some of the stuff that we've populated. Maybe you just go completely from scratch with your own layout, but you just run through and say, okay, cool. For all the contact properties or all the events or all the company properties, here it is. Here's what it equals to. Boom. It's equal to X. And then run a few examples through it. Like, even before you've got it in HubSpot, just like pick some random contacts out of the database and say, like, okay, how many points do I think this person would have gotten? Because there are going to be, the last step in this is basically setting up some dashboards to keep an eye on your scores to make sure nothing's looking weird. But even just that gut check of, oh, okay, yeah, I think this person would have landed at X, Y, or Z, gives you an initial calibration of how kind of accurate you think that's going to end up being. Then, step 4, not just step 3 in bold. Step 4 is actually building it, but then you want to set up a dashboard. So this is a dashboard that I built for another client. And what it does is I generally have a couple of things. One, the average HubSpot score all time, the average HubSpot score this year, and the average HubSpot score in this case, we'll do form submitters. So what I keep an eye on here is, say we're targeting 50, which this client is, and their average HubSpot score this year is 8.27. That probably means that something is wrong with that score, or at least that we're being too stingy with points, because I usually want the average score to come in just below my SQL level. And the idea, again, going back to the purpose of lead scoring being, we want to help the team decide, filter out the submissions that require immediate action and the ones that don't. So if every contact is coming in under our SQL score, well, then nothing's getting sent to sales. If every contact is landing at or above our SQL score, well, then everybody's getting sent to sales. So our average should come in somewhere, 10, 15, 20 points below where our SQL threshold is, because that means that about half or a little bit less than half are crossing the SQL threshold and getting sent to sales. And then maybe a little bit more than half are landing in that bucket where we have to nurture them. And again, going back to, number of unique forms submitted is 2 or 3. That's how I give people extra points if they do additional submissions. So the idea being that, hey, somebody has submitted the newsletter form, they've gotten 10 or 15 points for that. They've been on the site twice, they got 5 points for that. And they clicked the welcome email to the newsletter. So that's landed them at like 25, 35 points. Then if I start that nurture sequence and they engage in something, they download that resource, they sign up for a webinar or something like that, then that additional points boost for that next engagement is what pushes them across that 50-point threshold. Because again, if your nurture program is asking people to do too many things before qualifying them for that next step of sales engagement, well, then you might be, again, this is all stuff that you'll find out in your own organization, but you're probably leaving a little bit of money on the table by making them jump through too many hoops before you're ready to call them qualified. So again, going back, figure out what matters, figure out how you're going to quantify and track, lay that out in your matrix and start assigning some scores, set it up and set up some dashboards to keep an eye on that average score and how many people are falling into each bucket over kind of a rolling time frame, so you can see how well is that actually performing. So let's actually hop over and take a look at the HubSpot score. I'm also, while I'm making my switch over, I'm going to I'm going to bring up, we're up to 9. I'm glad to see that a few other people, made an appearance in here. So welcome everybody that hopped on while I was deep in the throes of showing stuff off. Okay. So let's get my share going. Window. Okay, I'm actually gonna have to pull that out into its own window. Sorry. This is just me using Bevy rather than. Is that? There we go. Perfect. Sorry about that. Okay. So lead scoring. So like I said, I'm going to show off the 2 places that lead scoring lives. I'll start by saying this is the beta version. So now under the marketing tab, this wasn't historically the case, and this might not be present for you yet. Like I say, it's still in beta. It's a fairly wide release beta at this point, but it's not in every account. So if you don't see this, you will probably see this at some point, but this is where lead scoring lives today. We're going to look at this in just a second, but I am going to show you where lead scoring for you probably lives today, or where or where it might have lived for you historically. So if you go under settings and then properties, most likely you're gonna have a contact property called HubSpot score. And this just comes with every HubSpot account. Like this is when people talk about the lead score, they are talking about the HubSpot score. That's how how it historically lived. You might field type. You might actually have more score properties, and again, if you do, congratulations, you leveled up your lead scoring game. But you can make additional score properties as well. So sometimes people will have multiple lines of business or multiple personas, and they'll want to say, hey, cool, I want to score IT directors, if they see this page down, submit this form, view, attend this webinar, but I want to score CEOs if they do this or this or this other thing. So when I say HubSpot score, often people think of it as a monolith, like my one scoring property, though the one property to rule them all. That isn't necessarily the case. You can have multiple score properties that are either getting added together to power one master score or are scoring people completely independently. Regardless of how your score property works, this is what it used to look like. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but you would basically have negative scores and positive scores. You would go in, you would add a criteria, you would say contact, job title, contains any of, CEO, and I would say I want that to be worth 10 points. I would go set, I would go apply, and then when I saved this property, it would go and recalculate for everybody in HubSpot. And that's actually something that I'm going to pause to touch on, because this applies in the new score and the old score, which is it's lead score or HubSpot score is a dynamic value. If you change the criteria in the scoring, it changes the score. So when we talk a little bit more in the next couple steps about automation, it's important. The more automation you have dependent on your score, the harder it is to edit that score. Like, so when you're first setting it up, you're free. You're like, you haven't built any workflows based on it. So if you calculate your lead score and you're like, oh, that's out of whack, and you need to edit it, go nuts. There's nothing dependent on it. But once you've got notifications to sales or routing or complicated nurture workflows built on your score or things that are dependent on your score, it gets harder to change, because if you decide you want to add a new page view criteria or a new geography criteria to your lead score, what that might do is that might add points to people who had converted, months, maybe even years ago. And if that score then maybe changes their life cycle stage or changes their grade, and that kicks off a notification to sales, you're going to find, oh, wow, I've just spammed the sales team with new lead notifications for 400 people, most of them whom actually converted back in 2021. So when editing your score, just be cognizant of anything that depends on that score, and know that changes to your score can potentially trigger those old automations. So that's one thing. Not so much of a problem when you're just getting started, but can definitely become a problem later on. All right, so new lead scoring. And this is, like I say, it is a beta. It is changing. If you come back and build a lead score 2 months from now, it's probably going to look a little bit different than it actually does today. But if we just go start from scratch, the big difference between new lead scoring and old lead scoring is that they now have broken it out into engagement scores and fit scores. So engagement scores, if I click into here, kind of create, it only lets me add event criteria. So clicks on ads, calls, CTAs, documents, forms, things that people are engaging with. So the reason that they did this is that they found a lot of folks wanted to know separately, is this person crossing my threshold because they're a perfect fit? Like they match the job title, they match the geography, they match our company size, they match our annual revenue. So they're just like, fits to a T. Or am I getting alerted because it's like, yeah, they've got director in their job title, but they've just viewed 50 blogs and clicked on 100 links in my emails, because sometimes that's consequential. The other thing that's new is that you never used to be able to decay scores. So you would have to put in negative criteria to be like, hey, I'm going to give somebody 50 points for checking out my website, but then I'm going to take away 5 points if that view was more than 30 days ago, and then I'm going to take away 15 points if that view was more than 60 days ago, and then I'm going to take away the full 50 points if I was more than 6 months ago. And that kind of got messy, because what would happen is that you would see those scores drop, but then somebody would do it again and their score would jump up a huge percentage because you now lost all of those negatives. Anyway, you can set your decay mechanism, and or you can not have a decay mechanism. The other thing you can do is, so many scroll bars, is you can do groups. So I could have my new scoring group for marketing emails, and then I could have my additional scoring group for, nope, didn't take, but let's say I called that form submissions. And then out of my 0 to 100 scoring, maybe I want to go, maybe I want to go to 500. I could basically say, hey, I don't want you to be able to get more than 200 points from marketing emails or 300 points from form submissions. And then I would just add all of my form submissions, form submission, filter event, form name. It's any of contact us form, boom, and then I'll say that's 250 points. So, and also what this is going to do is we can then say, do we score it every time or do we limit it to X number of points? So again, you could have limits on the groups, you can have limits on individual contributors, and this score every time is what allows you to, what eliminates the need to have kind of like redundant scoring criteria to say, how many points do I give them if they've clicked once? How many times do I give them if they've clicked twice? How many times do I give them if I've clicked 3 times? I would just say add event criteria, marketing email, click the link in an email. Email name is known, so any email. So they click the link in any email, add 25 points, and then I'm going to limit that to 250 points. So that basically means I'm going to give them 25 points up to having achieved 250 points. So I'm going to stop scoring you after you've clicked a link in an email more than 10 times, any link in any email more than 10 times. And now again, you may or may not want to do that. You might say, hey, all email interactions should factor into my score, but you can go from there. So that is engagement score. Again, it's based on people doing things. Fit score works pretty much exactly the same, only it's based on data directly from that contact. So this is where your job title, your first name, your last name, your email address, your industry, XYZ ends up. And then this is where you can say, this is why it's important to know whether the data that you're tracking is scored at the contact level, the company level, or at some other object. Because again, if you're going to trust HubSpot's AI to tell you what industry an associated company is with, well then you're not going to find that information on the contact. You're going to have to look at the associated company, industry is any of. Boom. So, and each one of these scores that we're kind of building in the builder here is then going to show up in in a field name. So you can see this here: fit score, date I created, engagement score, date I created it. Those are now actually just properties that exist in your property list that you can reference, in workflows and automations and anything like that, the same way that you used to be able to reference the old HubSpot score property. And then last but not least is a combined score. So this works just like the old lead scoring used to work with. You can add groups for events. You can add groups for properties. Also, something I also want to say is you can, with any HubSpot score now, restrict it to only scoring certain contacts. So if you don't want to score your customers, you could just create a list of anybody where lifecycle stage equals customer, and then it's going to stop scoring those people, or it's not going to score those folks in the first place. Sometimes, because that can throw off your average HubSpot score. If you're just like, give me an average of everybody. But, Bill, who's been my client for 5 years and is constantly clicking on my stuff and has a lead score of 10,000, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I don't need that score throwing off my averages. So maybe I throw together a list of my customers that I don't score based on.
Hey, Cody. While you've paused there for a moment, we have a question. Do you have any recommendations on making the switch from the native HubSpot score properties to the new beta?
Ooh, that is a great question. And I wish I could say that I did. I really don't, only because I haven't had to do it yet. We're very much still straddling the universe of most people just have scores built on the old one. Most people haven't started building scores in the new one yet. So I haven't had to do a cutover. My instinct would probably be don't, unless you need to. And this is literally just like gut first glance instinct. I'm like, because they are ultimately just two ways to power a regular old score property, unless you have a really cluttered scoring property today that has a lot of redundant rows to account for 1 click, 2 click, 3 click, 4 click, 5 click, 10 click, etc., then I think that there's some efficiency to be gained by pivoting that to something that allows you to assign points, incrementally. But if you do just have oh no, we feel pretty good about it, we're mostly scoring based on demographic stuff anyway, I just be like, trust what you have until there's a reason to rebuild. Cool. Right on. All right. I'll get my screen share back. I won't rush through this next couple of bits, but I will definitely leave some time for some other questions. There's that. Screen share, window, PowerPoint. There you go. Of course. There we go. Okay. I hinted at this earlier, lifecycle stages. Lead scores, to put it in a very jargony way, are often too dynamic to work with directly. What I mean by that is often, because lead scores are constantly changing, as if you have negative criteria, as people, start clicking on emails, lead scores change a fair bit between getting recalculated or whatever. So a lot of times, instead of basing workflows or automations directly on the lead score, like saying, hey, as soon as somebody crosses 50 points of lead score, enroll them in the nurture or trigger a sales notification. We often say a lead score powers or sets a life cycle stage based on score ranges. And that just means that we'll have a workflow that'll be looking at the HubSpot score, the lead score, and say, hey, has it become more than 25 but less than 50? Awesome. Put that person in MQL. And then I don't have to worry about if that score changes at all during that range, between that range of 25 and 50. I just have to have another workflow that says, hey, when it crosses 50, assign them the SQL lifecycle stage. Also, this I find is really helpful because sometimes you as a marketing team want to want somebody to be a qualified lead, so hit say SQL, even though they haven't done enough points wise to be considered an SQL. The most common situation is, over those two, is a talk to sales form or directly importing people after a trade show. So if somebody has requested to talk to sales, doesn't matter how many how many blogs they've clicked on, doesn't matter what their job title is for the most part. If you're offering them the opportunity to talk to sales by submitting a form, you're probably just going to say something's going to notify the sales team that somebody wants to talk to them. So in that situation, I usually don't even worry too much about the score on those. I just have the form via the standard lifecycle stage setting features available on a form. I'll just have that form just set somebody to SQL. Don't worry about the score. At that point, the score is secondary. They're in SQL because they're getting sent to sales. The other situation is if you import somebody. Like when you import a person, we talked about this earlier, you're not going to have cookie data for them, and they're probably not going to have submitted any forms. You're just going to know, okay, I talked to these 23 people at the trade show. I'm going to import them to HubSpot. I know that they're qualified. So rather than having to build something into the score that says anybody who was from import and has this special checkbox or whatever, to kind of spoof them up to that 50-point level or whatever level you've set for your SQL, working with the life cycle stage as kind of an intermediary between the lead score and what happens because of the lead score, you can set people to SQL. You could just import those people that you want to send to sales at life cycle stage SQL. And then even though, their score is only going to be 11, the sales team knows it's like, okay, they're sales qualified lead. So I'm going to trust that designation rather than worrying about like, oh, why did you send me this person that only has 11 points? So life cycle stages frequently work in conjunction with your lead score to translate kind of an abstract number into something that's a little bit more digestible for people who aren't living in their lead scores every single day. And again, here's what that kind of looks like. This is also part of our rubric. And this is another valuable thing that I want to talk about, which is exclusion criteria. So often people will say, oh, I don't do business with SaaS companies. So if somebody tells me that their industry is SaaS, put negative 500 points. And what really all that's saying is I never want that person to be considered a qualified lead. Like they have some data point, usually country or industry, that means I will never be able to do business with them. I don't love putting that as a negative score because technically they could dig themselves out of that hole, especially in the new model. Like you give somebody minus 500, but they go on to read every blog of yours for the next 18 months. Suddenly they've dug themselves out of that 500 point hole and they're still showing up on your doorstep anyway. Second, it throws off your lead score averages and calculations, having a few random people with negative 1,000 points or whatever you decide to give them. So often what I'll do is I will say that to achieve those additional life cycle stages, you need to meet the points criteria and you can't meet what I consider exclusion criteria. So if somebody has a HubSpot score of 75, but their geography is SaaS or their country is China, I simply won't give them the SQL lifecycle stage. They're engaged, they're a fit based on certain data, but they're just never going to achieve this milestone. And because it's this milestone, not the score itself, that triggers my notifications or triggers my nurtures or triggers my follow-up, I don't have to worry about them getting this and then landing in the sales inbox or just sending a sales notification. Also, this is probably a really good, not something that I've done before, but as I'm talking about it, I'm like, this would also be a good list of people not to score in the new HubSpot scoring model. Is if you know that you have people who meet certain exclusions, create a list of people who meet, you know, business viability exclusions, and then just simply don't score them. And then that's also going to avoid throwing off your counts of people who have certain scores or skewing up or down your averages for people that you're never going to do business with anyway. Common pitfalls, just some stuff that people often do. Again, I've already talked about using negative scores to disqualify certain contacts. Common actions triggering multiple scoring criteria. This is one that a lot of people fall into, which they'll say, okay, I want to give somebody 10 points for clicking a link in an email. I want to give people, 10 points for having seen more than 2 pages on my website. I want to give people 20 points for submitting my newsletter form or my webinar form. And I want to give people 10 points because we know their job title. And you're like, okay, each one of those makes sense on their own. But then you think about it and you're like, oh, wait, okay, so they're going to get 20 for doing the form. Cool. So I know they've been on my website. And unless they came directly to my contact page, I know that they've seen at least that page and the front page, which is 2 pages. Okay, so literally everybody who submits that form is going to get at least 30 points. And then I'm giving points for knowing the job title, but job title is a required field on my form. So really, I'm just giving everybody who submits the form 40 points. Oh, right. And I send the download that form gives them. I send that via email with a button that says click here to download it. So 95% of the people who submit that form are going to go on to click at least one marketing email as part of this whole transaction. So then all of a sudden 5 scores, which makes sense individually, really just add up to giving everybody who's done a specific action 50 points. And then people wonder, it's like, oh, why are so many, leads becoming qualified? Why are my average scores so high? So when you're building those sets of criteria, just step back and from a user experience perspective, be like, is everybody who does this one thing also going to automatically get points for this other thing? And if that's the case, maybe I should just make the actual action itself worth more, or maybe I should, consider not giving them extra points for doing a thing that basically everybody is going to do. So just thinking about how all your scores add up in actual scenarios. Scoring for contacts added by imports or integrations. Again, talked about this a little bit in, hey, it's nice to, maybe you do need to score based on imports or integrations, like maybe importing is going to be a really common scenario, at which point, you just want to make sure you're structured your imports so that you are including the data in that import that you need to score based on fit. Or maybe you give bonuses, 10, anybody who comes via import gets 10 points because you know that those are all coming from partners that are kind of already semi-vetted. So maybe import in your instance is actually a bonus as opposed to somebody who's coming via the website or something like that. So just factoring in how people coming in from other data sources are going to figure into your scoring model, really important. And then scoring based on incomplete data. If you don't have the data, you're not going to get a consistent score out of it. So what does lead scoring actually look like? Now, again, this is speaking entirely from a Hubcap Solutions perspective. I make no promises that this is any kind of industry standard or that this is exactly how long these projects take with anybody else. But for Lisa and I, if you come to us and you're like, hey, I want to do a lead scoring project, you're generally looking at 10 to 12 hours worth of work on our end. Probably 6 to 8 of those hours are collaborative work because, again, you're going to be working with us to fill out the lead scoring matrix. We're going to be setting up the scoring processes and building the life cycle stages. And then you're going to be doing some spot checking and keeping an eye on that average and the outlier lead scores. Also, this is assuming that you have, and this will be applicable to pretty much anybody. If you have an established lead score and you want to change it, that generally takes more time because you generally have to do all of the same stuff. You still have to fill out the matrix. You still have to, adjust the score, set up the workflows, et cetera, et cetera. But then we just have to consider, when are we going to pause those other automations? Or, how are we going to treat people who already have scores in range X, Y, or Z? So like with anything in HubSpot, if you're looking to modify something that's already pretty enmeshed in your business, that's going to add some extra complexity and extra time. But I included this primarily because I wanted to say that doing lead scoring, especially if you don't have anything already in place, isn't a huge lift. Like, it is something that is a valuable exercise, and it can be a fairly bite-sized project to chew on, whether you choose to tackle it internally or with a partner. It doesn't have to be a world-shattering behemoth. And so that brings us basically to the end of our regularly scheduled programming. So we've got, 6 hungry folks other than myself and Lisa. So if you guys have any questions, I would love to tackle them for you. And feel free, if it makes sense, just throw a thumbs up in the chat and I can unmute you and you can just ask verbally rather than have to type it all out. Right on. Thanks, Madison. Glad you got some value out of it. Bradley, Meg, only because I didn't have the chance to, welcome you guys specifically. Thanks again for hopping on. All right. Yeah, Dan, the new scoring is sometimes HubSpot tinkers with things just for the sake of tinkering with things. You're welcome, TK. Thanks so much. But definitely the lead scoring, is an improvement. And I think foregrounding it by making it a menu item rather than kind of like burying it deep under properties where nobody knows where. Great. Thanks, Bradley. I really appreciate your time and attention today. Okay. Well, other than, pleasant affirmations from people who appreciated the information, I think we are ready to call ourselves a session. So yeah, I will send you guys off to enjoy your days. And if you are in the States and decided to take a chunk out of your Thanksgiving to join us, then thank you so much. And we will keep you guys apprised. Oh, our next webinar is going to be in the new year. It is going to be basically, how to maximize working with a HubSpot partner. So this is basically going to be us sharing some lessons that we've had from our history of working with clients, just to help you guys, anybody that is considering or is currently working with any HubSpot partner, just some of the stuff that we've seen that is going to help you, pay a little bit less because you'll be more efficient with your time and get better results out of that collaboration. So if that interests you guys, keep an eye out. I'll shoot out an email to all of our attendees with when we've got that one scheduled. Thanks again.